now, as we continue to consider the joy that the Christ child brings to each of us, let us examine together for just a few moments the Gospel of Matthew. Shall we read together Matthew chapter 11, verses 2 through 11? A rather remarkable passage, I think. Stay alert. You might be surprised at what happens here. Matthew chapter 11, verses 2 through 11. Now, when John, this is John the Baptist, not to be confused with John the Apostle. Now, when John, while imprisoned, heard of the works of Christ, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, "Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for someone else?" Jesus answered and said to them, "Go and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, and the lame walk. The lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. And blessed is the one who does not take offense at me." As these men were going away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? But what did you go out to see? A man dressed in soft clothing? Those who wear soft clothing are in kings' palaces. But what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and one who is more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, 'Behold, I send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you.' Truly I say to you, among those born of women, there has not arisen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Shall we pray? Holy God, I ask that collectively today, when we are done examining this rich text from the life of Jesus, I pray that we might offer a sigh of relief. I pray that we might leave here encouraged. I pray that we might hear through this text "You got this." Help us, O God, to deal with the difficulties of life and with the grief that comes sometimes during the Christmas season. And it is in Jesus' name that we offer this prayer unto you, our most good and gracious God. Amen. Well, I wonder on this third Sunday of Advent, this Sunday of great joy, I wonder about you. What about you? As the text was read, do you identify with the situation that John the Baptist finds himself in? I am your pastor, so I am, by right of my title and my position, I'm allowed to ask these kinds of questions of you from time to time. Have you been there? In your own life, in your own walk with God through Christ, have you been there yourselves? John the Baptist is in jail because he rebuked King Herod for sleeping with his brother's wife. John the Baptist said to King Herod, "You know, King, you really should not be sleeping with your brother's wife. That's not proper. That's not good." Well, King Herod got mad and put John the Baptist in jail. So this is where we find John in our text. He is in jail. and he hears of all the works that Jesus is doing. And then the narrative shifts in a different direction, perhaps a direction that we did not expect initially. John the Baptist sends some of his disciples. He's in jail. He can't go. So he sends some of his disciples to go to Jesus and to ask Jesus, are you the one? In the Greek, are you the Christos? Are you the Christ? Are you the Messiah? Are you in fact the one who is to come? Or, John the Baptist wants to know, should we expect someone else? Now remember, this is the same John the Baptist who baptized Jesus, and he did so with hesitation. Do you remember Matthew's account of Jesus' baptism by John in Matthew chapter 3, beginning in verse 13? Then Jesus arrived from Galilee at the Jordan, coming to John to be baptized by him. But John tried to prevent Jesus, saying, I have no need to be baptized by you, and I have need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me? But Jesus answering said to him, permit it at this time, for in this way it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness. And then he permitted him. So, isn't this interesting that earlier in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus comes to John the Baptist to be baptized by John the Baptist, and John says, whoa, wait a minute, buddy. I should not be baptizing you. You are the Messiah. Rather, you should be baptizing me. But Jesus says, no, it is proper for us to do this to fulfill all righteousness. And therefore, John says, well, okay, Jesus, I'll baptize you. John seems pretty confident in this text about Jesus' identity. He seems pretty confident that Jesus is the expected one, that Jesus is the Christ, that Jesus is the Messiah. In fact, he says, wait a minute, Jesus, this isn't right for somebody like me to baptize somebody like you. And now we find him in jail, and he sends his disciples to Jesus and says, really? Are you the expected one? Are you the Messiah? What happened to John the Baptist? How did he go from so confident to questioning and doubting the identity of this Jesus of Nazareth? Well, it happens, and I'm wondering today if it's ever happened to you. Last week I heard of the Reverend Howard John Wesley. He is the pastor of Alfred Street Baptist Church in Alexandria, Virginia. He's been there for 11 years. The church runs 4 services on Sunday morning, and he preaches to around 4,500 people every week. And he stood in front of his congregation last Sunday, and he said, I need a break. I need a sabbatical. I'm tired, I'm exhausted, and God feels so distant right now. He said, God feels so distant right now that I need a break. And it happens, doesn't it, church? I mean, it does happen this way. We start off strong, we start off confident, we hit a bump, and then we ask, are you really the one, Jesus? We find ourselves in prison. We find ourselves dealing with the obstacles and the curveballs that this life throws at us. And we say, oh, really? The Messiah? Oh, really? The Christ? Oh, really? The expected one? Really? It happened to John the Baptist. It has happened to Reverend Howard John Wesley. I confess to you that it's happened to me, and I'm wondering about you today. Do you ever wonder in your own life if Jesus is really the Messiah? Do you ever say, oh, it doesn't necessarily look like it right now? Especially when we're in jail, right? Especially when we're exhausted, right? Especially when we feel distant from God, right? Especially when we're grieving, right? We ask these questions. And here's what intrigues me. Here's what might surprise you. I am intrigued by Jesus' response. I am intrigued by Jesus' answer to John's very honest question, are you the one? Notice verses 4 through 6 in Matthew 11. Jesus answered and said to them, go and report to John what you hear and see. And here he's quoting a lot of places from Isaiah, actually. The blind receive sight, and the lame walk. The lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. And blessed is the one who does not take offense at me. So Jesus tells his disciples to go back and tell John in prison, look, I'm doing messianic things. I'm raising the dead. I'm healing the sick. I'm giving sight to the blind. I'm giving hearing to the deaf. Go back and tell John that these are the kinds of things that I'm doing, and yes, I am the Messiah. The issue seems to be here that when the Messiah came, John didn't expect to be in jail. When the Messiah came, John expected, as did many other people, for the Messiah to exercise his power in another domain, in a kingly domain, in a military domain, to break the chains of Roman rule. And that didn't happen. And John, being a good preacher, John says to King Herod, look, King, you should not be sleeping with your brother's wife. That is inappropriate. That is not in accord with the will of God. And then King Herod puts John the Baptist in jail behind bars, and the Romans continue to reign and rule, and John the Baptist has a moment. Have you ever had a moment where you wonder? Have you ever had a moment when you question? Have you ever had a moment when you say, really? Really? The Christ, huh? The Messiah, huh? Well, John has one of these moments. And then, so Jesus says to John's disciples, go back and tell him that I'm raising the dead and I'm healing the blind and the deaf and all these kind of things. And then I want you to notice what Jesus does in response to John's question. It's amazing. Look at verse 7. As these men were going away, that's John the Baptist's disciples going back to John, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? But what did you go out to see? A man dressed in soft clothing? Those who wear soft clothing are in kings' palaces. But what did you go out to see? A prophet? Well, yeah, Jesus says, but I tell you, one who is more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it said, behold, I send my messenger, who will prepare your way for me. Now notice verse 11, church. I want you to get this. Truly I say to you, this is Jesus speaking. John sends his disciples to Jesus and says, are you really the Messiah? Jesus sends them back to John and says, yeah, I'm not doing exactly what you thought I would do. And by the way, I'm sorry you're in jail. But yeah, I'm the Messiah. And now look at verse 11. Truly I say to you, Jesus says, among those born of women, there is not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Among those born of women has not arisen anyone that is greater than John the Baptist. Wait a minute. I thought you weren't supposed to do this. I thought you weren't supposed to question God. I thought you weren't supposed to question Jesus. Well, John does. And John sends his disciples to Jesus, and are you the one? John questions the messianic identity of Jesus, and then Jesus says, hey, isn't John the Baptist the greatest? I mean, what an intriguing response. John says, are you the Messiah? Jesus says, chill, yeah, I'm the Messiah. And then there's no lightning from heaven. John the Baptist is struck. His disciples are not struck. And Jesus says, oh, John the Baptist, the one who just questioned my identity. Oh, among those born of women, there's nobody better. You think he's a prophet? Yeah, he's a prophet, but more than a prophet. He's better than a prophet. Incredible. Where's the lightning bolt? I thought you weren't supposed to do this kind of stuff when you're in prison, and life is difficult, and you're sick, and you're grieving. I thought you weren't supposed to do this kind of stuff. Where's the lightning bolt? Well, it doesn't come. I have had meaningful conversations with several persons lately for whom life is difficult. I have had meaningful conversations lately with several people who are grieving greatly. And I said to one such person recently, I said to him, I said, you know, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to question God. It's okay to have doubts about Christ. And this young man looked at me across the table and he said, no one has ever told me that before. And he had this great sigh of relief because he is questioning and he is doubting. He's in prison, and we do that sometimes when we're in prison. And he let out a sigh, and he said, no one has ever told me that before. In fact, I'll go one step further. I am of the opinion that for many of us, maybe not all of us, but for many of us who take Christian faith seriously, I mean, for those of us who have Jesus so deep in our bones, for those of us who struggle with faith and take it seriously, and, you know, I think that doubting and questioning is par for the course. In fact, I would contend that questioning and doubting leads to a more robust understanding of God. One more time, I want you to get this. I suggest to you that when we go through those periods of questioning God, when we go through those periods of doubting God, when we go through those periods where we wonder if God even exists, when we go through those periods where we wonder if Christ is the Messiah, I suggest to you that that experience leads to a more robust, stronger Christian faith. It happens even to pastors. And we sometimes wonder, are you the one? The third Sunday in Advent appears perhaps to be an odd time for a sermon like this, but maybe not. The holidays can be difficult. And we grieve during the holidays. It seems that during the holidays, past disappointments, they move from the back of our mind sometimes to the front of our mind. Maybe it's because we're out of routine. Maybe it's because we're not on our usual work schedule. Maybe it's because we see people that we do not usually see. And so past disappointments sometimes are moved from the back to the front of our minds. It's much like Dan Fogelberg's song, Old Lang Syne. You know that song? I love Dan Fogelberg. It's a song about, he meets an old lover at a grocery store on Christmas Eve. And they buy a beverage of choice. And they go into one of their cars, and it's totally innocent, but very emotionally draining. They revisit the past. They revisit the past. and they share their regrets. And we do that, don't we? We do that sometimes at Christmas. We wonder, why didn't I marry him when I had the opportunity? Nobody has ever loved me like he loves me. Why? Like he loved me. Why didn't I marry him? Or maybe sometimes we wonder just the opposite, right? Why did I marry him? Right? It can go both ways. Or we wonder, why didn't I take that job opportunity? Why wasn't I willing to take a risk? Why didn't I step out? Why didn't I do that? We wonder, why did he kill himself? Oh, I wish he hadn't done that. Why did he kill himself? Man, I miss my mother. Oh, I miss her so much. I miss her all the time, but especially at Christmas. I miss my mother. Oh, to hear my father's voice one more time. Right? And so this happens during the Christmas season. We grieve. We find ourselves in shackles. And I think that sometimes a congregation needs a minister to say this to them. A congregation of Christians needs a minister of the gospel of Jesus the Christ to say to them, it's okay to question. It's okay to doubt. It's okay to wonder if God even exists. It's okay to wonder and to question and doubt if Christ is the Messiah. It's okay. It's a part of the human experience. And my own experience with questioning and doubting has been, it has made me a much stronger Christian. And I suggest to you that the result is likely to be the same. Isn't it amazing that John the Baptist questions Jesus' messianic identity? He's in jail. Jesus, are you really the Messiah? And Jesus' response to that is, hey, John's the best. John's the greatest. You think he's a prophet? He's more than a prophet. Of all those born of women, there's nobody better than this guy that just questioned my identity. Isn't that amazing? No lightning bolt, no strike from heaven, nothing like that. Just an affirmation from Jesus that he understands John's position. So what about you? Do you identify with John? Have you ever been there? Are you there now? Maybe you'll be there tomorrow. Do you ever wonder, is this Christian stuff, is it really it? Is it really right? Do you ever wonder, is Jesus really the Messiah? Really the Christ? Well, I say to you, as a minister of the gospel of Jesus the Christ, on this third Sunday of the Advent season, that it's okay. It's okay. And you'll be better because of it. So don't stop it. Just let it run